So as you now know, once the keyframes for an animation have been declared, they need to be assigned to the element. We use the animation name and animation duration values so that the browser knows how long an animation should take to complete. Once we've declared the animation name property on an element, animations behave similarly to transitions. They can include a duration, a timing function, and a delay if desired. To start, animations need a duration declared using the animation duration property. As with transitions, the duration may be set in seconds or milliseconds. The file that we're going to be working on in this example is going to contain 6 circles. And the HTML is very simple. I have a div with a class of wrapper and 6 divs, all with a class of sphere and individual classes of S1 through 6. The S1 through 6 classes are simply there so that I can color the circles individually. I have a generic sphere class that's applying to all of them, and it's actually setting the color for the first sphere to being blue. These are the basic rules that I have on the rest of the elements on the page. We're going to go ahead and we're going to create some keyframe animations so that we can explore the timing function property. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make my @keyframes rule, and we're going to call this slide. Under from, I'm going to specify that the left value be set to 0. And under to, I'm going to transform the left value to 400 pixels. This is simply going to move the spheres from the left side of the screen and 400 pixels over to the right. In addition, I'm going to pass on the transform property, and I'm going to scale the circles by 2. And I'm also going to add some opacity. So I'm going to drop the opacity down to 50%. Now, as I've mentioned before, without adding animation, this doesn't do anything at all to the page. We need to then incorporate the animation so that this is tied to the elements. So I'm going to go into the sphere selector. I'm going to add animation, and this time we'll use the longhand method. So I'm going to use animation-name. We're going to specify slide, and then I'm going to use animation-duration, and we're going to specify that we want this to happen in 2.5 seconds. If I save now and we refresh, you can see how the circles are going to slide to the right-hand side of the page. They're going to grow to be twice as big, and their opacity is going to change to be 50%. So as you can see, once we've declared the animation name and animation duration property on the element, the behavior is similar to transitions. But unlike transitions, we have a lot more flexibility when using keyframes and animation, which we'll be exploring in this section of the course. The first additional property that we're going to look at is going to be the timing function. We can add a timing function onto the elements by adding the property of animation-timing function. And just like with transitions, we have the same sort of values available. We have ease, ease in, ease out, ease in out, linear, cubic Bezier, and we have a couple of other ones, steps, step end, and step start. We'll start off by just using ease, which is the default. So I'm going to apply the animation timing function of ease to the first sphere. My second sphere is going to have a timing function of ease in. My third sphere is going to have a timing function of ease out. The fourth sphere is going to have a timing function of ease in out. The fifth sphere is going to have linear. And my final sphere can have a timing function of cubic Bezier. Now remember that cubic Bezier is going to take some additional parameters, so I'm just going to plug some values in, and we'll save this and go back out to the browser. If we refresh, you can now see that all of the circles are moving and behaving quite differently. They're still doing the same sort of animation, but because I adjusted their animation timing function, each of them is going to move and have different timing results based on the parameters that we passed in. Using the animation timing function, you can really refine your animations and make them behave in a more unique way. Now, the animation timing function properties that we just used are commonly called the ease functions, and they're being defined with these keyword values. The exception is probably the cubic Bezier value, because You can customize this by passing in these specific values. The other two values that we haven't looked at yet are going to be step start and step end. Let's look at how the steps function allows you to specify intervals for the timing function. I'm going to open another, but very similarly scripted page. So this page only has 4 of the spheres on it. And I've gone ahead and I've set up a new @keyframes rule called color change. I'm simply going to change the color from the original blue shade to this yellow shade. And I'm also scaling these up to be twice as big and changing their opacity to be 50%. I'm not transitioning them from anything other than what's on the original sphere, so I'm not using from in this example. If we look at the animation, this is what's currently happening. So you can see that there's a smooth transition from the blue to the yellow shade, and also the size and the opacity. What we're going to do is we're going to explore the steps function that allows you to specify intervals for the timing function. So I'm going to come into S1 and we're going to specify our animation timing function, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to set this first one to step start. The second one is going to use step end. If we save now and we refresh on the page, you can see what happens, that both of the first 2 circles are going to just blink into their final or ending transitions areas. When step start is specified, the change of values occurs at the start of each interval, while the end is going to cause the change of values to occur at the end of each interval. Now, we can also pass in steps, which we're going to do for the 3rd and 4th spheres. So steps is a timing function that allows us to break an animation or a transition into segments rather than one continuous smooth transition from one state to another. We're first going to specify the number of steps. I'm going to pass in 4. Then I'm going to put a comma and I'm going to put the direction. The direction parameter is going to define the point at which the action declared in our @keyframes rule is going to occur. This value is optional, and if you don't specify anything, end is going to be the default. I'm just going to type in end right now. And we'll save this. And if we go back out and we play this, you can see that the 3rd circle is going to kind of pop, 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 pop. It's going to step through the animation, and because I used 4 steps, it's going to take 4 steps to do this. Let's go ahead and let's slow the animation down to 4 seconds so we can really see this happening. I'll go ahead and I'm going to add an animation timing function to the 4th sphere. For the 4th sphere, let's use steps, let's use 4, and let's use start so that we can do a comparison. I'm going to save, and if we refresh here in the browser, you can see that the animation is slightly different. The 3rd sphere actually really looks like it only gets to 3 pops. There's 1, there's 2, there's 3, and then it ends. While the 4th sphere is going to start immediately. So it doesn't actually have that delay on the very first increment of the duration. So a direction of start is going to denote a left continuous function, and our animation's first step is going to be completed as soon as the animation begins. It's going to jump immediately to the end of the first step and stay there until the end of this step duration. The direction of end denotes a right continuous function and directs the movement to stay put until the duration of the first step is completed. Each option essentially moves the element from a different side and will produce different positioning for the same animation. This probably will be easier to see if I create a box and put some movement on it. Let me show you that. So in order to show you how this is going to work, I've just added 2 boxes to my page, and they are wrapped inside of a div with a class of wrapper, and each box has its own unique class B1 and B2 assigned to it. Here are the styles that I have on the box, and these are similar to some of the things we were using in some of our previous lectures. And then I've created a @keyframes rule called box move that is simply going to move their top position from 0 to 200. So if I refresh the page, you can see that the boxes are going to smoothly transition down 200 pixels. Now, if we go ahead and we add our animation timing function, and I add steps, and I'll just pass in 4 steps. If we save and we refresh, you can see how the first box is going to appear to step down. Now we're only going to see 3 jumps from the first box, and that's because, remember, it's using the default behavior of end. I'm going to switch this first one to be using start, and for the second box, we're going to use the default behavior of end. If we save now and we refresh, you can see that the first box immediately jumps out and takes its first step as soon as the animation plays, while the second box waits. And in this case, because I'm using 4 steps and I'm using 4 seconds, every second a new movement is going to be felt by the box element. In this way, though, you're going to see how switching the start and ending point can have a direct impact on how the animation is going to be affected. So essentially, when you're switching, you can think of when we pass in start, it's as if the first step is here at the bottom of the box. So when I click refresh, since the step is at the bottom, it takes its first step. The second box, you can think of the first step as being located at the top of the box. So that first box essentially is going to step into its initial position. That is its first step. So just make sure that you understand the difference between start and end and how that can impact your animation. Steps can be helpful when you're creating certain sorts of animation. You could think of wanting to create like a clock where you want the second hand to rotate, but you don't want it to be smooth and continuous. You want it to actually mimic the hands on a real clock and go tick, 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 tick. So you could go ahead and you could specify steps to get a more realistic sort of animation. Later on in the course, we're going to look at where we might want to use the animation timing function of steps as opposed to the continuous smooth animation, so that we can get a progress that will mimic the sort of animation that we desire, rather than always having a smooth, continuous sort of animation.